Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We are excited to have you here to learn more about traveling to Iran and the Western Himalayas with Zegrahm in 2018. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. First, everyone on the line is muted. However, if you have any questions at any point in today's presentation, please type them into the questions pane and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. First, we have Jon Nicholson with us. Jon is our Director of Itinerary Development and Operations. Jon has been with Zegrahm for 21 years, and during that time has overseen virtually every aspect of the company. And as you might guess, Jon is also an avid traveler. He's visited nearly 100 countries and every continent, many several times over. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you.
We also have Kim Edwards here today with us. Kim is a program manager with Zegrahm. Her job is to oversee each and every detail of our expeditions and make sure they all go off without a hitch. Kim recently traveled to India this past year to scout many of the destinations we visit and is here to tell us about some of the new and exciting enhancements we made to our Western Himalayas program. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Good morning.
And last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce you to Gary Wince. Gary Wince is the expedition leader for Zegraham's Iran and Himalayas program. For the past 35 years, Gary has been traveling outside the U.S., researching, writing, photographing, and lecturing about distant lands and cultures. He is widely recognized as an expert on Asia and has made so many connections in the region, in these regions that we'll be visiting, that it's not uncommon for him to invite guests to join us for informal talks while out on tour. Gary is often traveling, which is actually the case today. He's just finishing leading a group of travelers with Zegrahm through Myanmar, but was able to make a quick appearance via video to tell us more about traveling in Iran and India. So let's welcome Gary.
Hi everybody, my name is Gary Wince. I'm a tour leader with Zegrahm since their beginning. We're here in Burma right now, in Myanmar. We're traveling up the Chinwin tributary, but that's another story. I'm here to invite you to join me on a couple really special trips. One is a trip to Iran. This is a 12-day trip, 11 nights, where we see the highlights of Iran. We spend a few days in Tehran, a couple days at the beginning, a couple days at the end. Wonderful place, lots of things to see in Tehran. But I want to tell you about the other places like Yazd, out in the desert, the site of the Zoroastrian homeland. A wonderful desert community, very friendly people. Everybody loves Yazd. And then we go on to Shiraz. We spend 3 nights in Shiraz. How many trips do you know where you spend 3 nights? And there's a reason we have 3 nights there. There's lots to see in Shiraz. From the tombs of great poets to the wonderful, beautiful parks to Islamic architecture that is world class. We also visit the site of Pasargad, the tomb of Cyrus the Great. We also continue on and we go to the Persepolis. Persepolis, of course, the site of the great palace built by Darius and the home of some of the most beautiful architecture in the world. This site archaeologically is an archaeological site now, and it is one of the highlights of Iran. Finally, we go to Esfahan. We spend 3 nights in Esfahan, just like we did in Shiraz, and again, the reason is there's lots to see there. Again, world-class architecture, beautiful parks along the river. And finally, on our drive back to Tehran, we visit the remote mountain village of Abyane, a beautiful stop along the way on our last days in Iran, and also the city of Kushan, visiting one of the great Persian parks, one of the great gardens of Iran, and back to Tehran. So ladies and gentlemen, I invite you, join me on this great trip. Then I want to tell you also about a trip I do to the Western Himalaya in India. We start out in Ladakh, which is really the Tibetan plateau. It's different from India. It's Tibet. Linguistically, culturally, historically, it's part of Tibet. It's high up on the plateau, beautiful, beautiful mountains. And then we go down to Amritsar, the home of the Golden Temple, also one of the highlights of the trip. And finally, we end up in Dharamsala. Dharamsala, the city of the government in exile for the Tibetans. the residence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and many other sites we see connected with the Tibetan refugee settlement there. A wonderful way to end our trip of a Tibetan theme in the Western Himalaya of India. Come and join me. I love going there. Hope you can join me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's always great to get a dose of his enthusiasm for exploring this part of the world. I understand there was some technical difficulties at the beginning. If you have any that come up during the webinar, don't hesitate to just put them in the questions pane and we'll try to address them. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jon and Kim to fill in a few more details about traveling to Iran and the Himalayas. Jon?
Thank you very much. And so let me go over a little bit about Iran in a bigger picture, as Gary has done quite a bit of detail on the itinerary. You can see we go next February to early March, ideal time of year, early spring. The days are clear, warm, but not hot, and the nights are cool. So a perfect time of year to visit Iran. And so many people ask, and I get asked this more about Iran than any other destination, why Iran? It certainly is in the news a lot. A lot of the news at times is negative, but I will say we have been running this trip for 20 plus years, and people come back from this trip always very happy and very impressed, and probably with an entirely different view of Iran than they went there. Iranians love Americans, and they very much feel a differentiation between the government and the individual people, and they look at Americans to do the same. And they're very interested in talking to Americans. Many of them have relatives who live here, as there's a huge expatriate community of Iranians who live in the US. So their English also tends to be good. So it's a great destination to visit, to have contact with the local people. Also, it has not changed dramatically in 35 years since the revolution has happened. So it's still a bit of the Middle East as it was 35 years ago. It has had development, but not huge amounts of development. So you get to see, it's not a Dubai or other very, very modern country, and there is a substantial amount of history. And historically and culturally, it's certainly one of the most significant countries in the Middle East, if not the most significant. Certainly for the Islamic culture and for the architecture is unsurpassed in Iran. And operating there, we have a great local leader, Hadi, who lived in the United States, moved back to Iran in the mid-'80s and has run a tour company there since. The advantage of having him is he's lived in both cultures. He's very good at bridging the gap. And he's great at approaching local Iranians and saying, hey, jump in the bus and talk to us while we go to the next place. And it's a great way to meet people. These are small groups, usually no more than 14 people. And so you really get a chance to meet Iranians. So why explore Iran? Because it is unique in the Middle East. It's actually Persian, not Arabic. It has stunning architecture. And probably most importantly, it has, I think, the friendliest people in the Middle East. So Gary has gone over some of these destinations, but here's a map of what we do. We do this by overland. The distances are not vast, but it lets us have a chance of seeing more of the countryside. So we head south, and after starting in Tehran, where we spend 2 full days touring, seeing the highlights. Tehran is definitely a busy, bustling capital, but there are things there to see. But the real sort of jewels in Iran are after you leave Tehran. So we head south down toward Yazd, which is regarded as one of the oldest towns on earth. And then from there continue to Shiraz. So for all of us who enjoy a Shiraz glass of wine with dinner, this is actually where it came from. Much as everything we get probably comes from Australia or California, it actually all started here in Iran. I will, however, do a quick side note. You won't get any Shiraz in Iran now because it's one of the few trips we offer where even though we include beer and wine, you're not going to get any beer and wine. So that is just one note, is that it is a dry country in Iran. Shiraz, we spend 3 nights there It has a huge amount of things to see and to do. It's got a theological school, it's got bazaars, it's got beautiful gardens. And I think all of these places, visiting them, it's very authentic. They're not there for tourists, they're there for the Iranians. And it's not like being in a place where they've been preserved and now it's overrun by tourists. In Shiraz, when you go to the bazaar, it is Iranians. It's not a bunch of European and American tourists. We also do a couple of day trips outside of Shiraz up to Persepolis, before we then continue north from there up to Esfahan. Esfahan has the best architecture in Iran. There's some of the pictures there you'll see on the screen of the intricate art. And noted for those of you who have been to Samarkand, this meets or maybe even beats what you get in Samarkand, which is considered some of the most beautifully decorated mosques in the world. There's incredible palaces here, and the current government has done a good job preserving these. They are still actively used, so they are not big mosques that are sitting there empty. They're used on a Friday. They're still actively, it's still something that's not just there for show. And then after Esfahan, we spend a fairly long day driving north through some mountain towns back to Tehran before we depart home. So this is, as Gary put it, a great way to get an introduction to Iran and see all of the high points in Iran, as well as with traveling with Gary and with our local leader Hadi to meet some of the friendly Iranian people. So I hope you can join us next year. It's a great time of year, and from past guests who have been, the number one thing they say about it is, wow, the architecture and the people, it was so much better than what I thought.
Great, thank you, John. So now we're going to move on and talk about Spirit of the Himalayas, and I think Kim is going to talk a little bit more about this trip.
Yes, so Spirit of the Himalayas, Ladakh and Dharamsala. It's in May, late May of 2018, which is an optimal time of year to visit. Clear skies and a little bit cooler. There is some altitude, but we have addressed the itinerary in such a way that this you will acclimatize naturally. So this is a program that we have run in the past, and we have enhanced the itinerary in 2018. So why explore the Himalayas? Well, apart from the dramatic scenery, it is a photographer's dream destination, from vast valleys to some of the highest peaks in the world. A postcard cannot do this place justice. You have to see it for yourself. It also houses some of the world's most ancient monasteries and sites that chronicle the footsteps of Buddhism in northern India. So upon arrival in Delhi, we'll do 2 nights in Delhi, visiting Old and New Delhi. We'll move on and fly to Leh, where we'll be for 3 nights, and continue on to Alchi and Lamaruyu for 2 more nights. So one highlight of the 2018 itinerary is that we are using a brand new camp, which is set in the shadow of the Thick Sea Monastery. This is the Chamba Camp in Leh. We'll spend 4 nights here in total, including 1 day of acclimatization and relaxation for you to photograph some of the scenery surrounding where this camp is set. We'll also have exclusive use of this camp, so we will be the only group there, and we will be basing all of our activities from here throughout the region.
And for those of you who might have been to Africa, this will actually bring back memories. This is very much modeled after the deluxe tented camps of Southern Africa. And it's a new traveling camp in India that we have started to use, and the reviews are phenomenal. You feel like you have your own villa when it actually is a traveling camp.
Yeah, absolutely. So tours in Leh. We're going to be including a visit to the 17th century Leh Palace, the Heritage Museum, and also visiting a local bazaar. Of course, no trip to Leh is complete without a tour of the Thick Sea Monastery, and we'll explore some of the paintings, the stupas, and the statues that call this place their home. We will also visiting Alchi and Lamaruyu. Alchi is a small village north of Leh. and it houses one of the oldest monasteries in the region, the Alchi Monastery. Moving on to Lamaruru, it's known for its monastery as well, but it's also a lunar-like moonscape, so very keen for photographers. And it also it houses one of the Rinsong Monastery, which is known for its very strict rules and very strict standards, but it's known to locals as the paradise for meditation. So we'll be sure to make a visit there, and you can see how this compares to some of the other monasteries that we'll visit on the itinerary. So from the Leh region, Ladakh, we move back via Delhi to Amritsar. We'll be in Amritsar for 2 nights, and this allows us 1 full day to explore the Golden Temple and its surrounding regions. This is the spiritual center for the Sikh faith, and you'll be able to see many, many people on pilgrimage here to this site. We'll also have the opportunity to meet with local religious leaders and learn some of the basics of their faith. From Amritsar, we will move on and make our way to Dharamsala for 4 nights, and this is the spiritual hub of northern India, and we will have 4 full days to explore this region that Gary Wince, our tour leader, knows like the back of his hand. So this is the region where His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls home. It's known as Little Tibet, and combined with the scenic views, it's going to be an absolute highlight of the itinerary. So like I said, 3 full days here to explore and have access to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Some of the sites there include the Tibetan Children's Museum. This houses 2,000 children. And this also is, as our slide says, the best place to see Tibetan culture. So we also we have access to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's assistant, who will do our best to connect us with His Holiness, although, you know, this can never be guaranteed. He also provides his interpretation of the sites that we will visit.
And he also, in the past, we've had him every year, and he has helped us get into places that a lot of people, visitors, can't go to. And Gary, having spent time here, having met His Holiness the Dalai Lama, has a lot of insider connections in this area, and that's partly what makes this trip special. It is very much about the religious, both Sikh as well as Buddhism. So it's got a very much of a religious bent and education to it. But with the insider access that Gary has to the people he knows, we'll really bring it alive more, and not something you could ever get if you went there on your own.
That's correct. And including some of the other sites that I'll just quickly mention, the Tibetan Medicine and Astrology Center, the Museum of Tibetan Art, and the Ninchung Monastery. And these are all very, very iconic sites for this region, and Gary and our local guides will be able to really interpret these sites and tell the story of this whole region.
And all of this with the backdrop of the Himalayas. So you get beauty of the geographic scenery, as well as stunning culture, and as Kim said, the photographic opportunities just due to the colors in Amritsar or up with the Tibetan culture is phenomenal.
So if you would like to extend your time in northern India, we offer a Srinagar extension. The group will fly from Dharamsala back to Delhi with an overnight there. Guests who are going to make their way homeward will go to the airport. The group that would like to continue on and explore further, we will fly to Srinagar. And this is known as Venice of the East. It's known for its gardens, its lakes, its houseboats. It's surrounded by 3 lakes, and then obviously the Himalayan mountains make an excellent backdrop as well. Here we will be we'll be staying on a luxurious houseboat, our whole group will be, which is obviously iconic to this region. We'll be exploring floating markets from the houseboat, from using that as a base. This location obviously allows itself amazing gardens. One of the gardens that we'll be visiting is called the Garden of Love. The other ones include the Royal Springs and the Garden of Pleasure. So each one is specifically designed with a theme in place, and we will have the local guides be interpreting this as well. We'll also visit a local mosque, which is said to enshrine a hair of from Prophet Muhammad. So being able to experience the beauty, the natural beauty, the gardens, the scenery with the mountains, but also this very spiritual location as well, that really is encompassing this whole extension.
Wow, great. Thank you both, Jon and Kim. Very informative. I've worked here for several years, learned a lot myself, so thank you. Now we're going to open it up to questions. We already have had a few come in, but if you have any questions for either Jon or Kim about either itinerary, feel free to write them in the questions pane and then we'll answer them. So our first question is about Iran specifically. It looks like in the past we've flown from place to place. Is this tour overland or do we fly? And kind of what are the approximate distances? And I think Jon addressed this a little bit at the beginning, but maybe should just kind of touch on how we travel in Iran.
So good question. We do travel overland. We had done air travel at times in the past, but by the time you got to the airport, checked in and flew, because the distances aren't that great, there was not a lot of time gained. So this is overland. We really only have 2 longish days. The first one from Tehran down to Yazd, that is about 6 hours or so. And then the last day from Esfahan back to Tehran is, because we make a lot of stops, about 8 hours. But there is a lot of stops, so it's not as though you're going to be in a vehicle all of the time. There you stop, get out for an hour, and then continue on. We went to this about 4 years ago, and it has been a much better experience for the guests because there are some smaller towns you can stop in on the way, where the people are like surprised to have Americans there and happy to meet people. So yes, this is all overland. You only fly to and from Tehran.
Great, thank you. Another question about the Iran trip, about just women traveling through Iran, and specifically if they are allowed in the mosques.
They are allowed in the women's section of the mosque. They are not allowed on the main floor. For most of them, if it's an active mosque, there is occasionally exceptions if it's more a visitor mosque, and I can get more details on which ones are that. But from the women's section, you can see it. They obviously do have the requirement of wearing the head covering and keeping your arms covered and your knees covered.
Great, thank you. And are there any other specifics as far as the dress code for anybody traveling in Iran, or is it mostly just keeping knees and arms covered?
That is correct. Knees and arms for men as well. You can't wear shorts wandering around. So it's effectively, we encourage light long sleeve shirts and wearing pants. If you wanted to wear sandals, that's perfectly okay. And for women, the same thing, but also the women need to have their head covered, which men do not.
Great, thank you. Looks like that's all the questions we have. Here's another one coming in. Just a moment. Are there any safety issues in Iran?
Actually, no. It's actually one of the safest internally. It is one of the safest countries in the Middle East. They make a lot of rumble, but the actual country itself inside is a very peaceful country with an exceptionally low crime rate.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we sign off for today? No? All right, well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. We'll be recording this webinar and then posting it on our YouTube channel, and you can access that through our website. So if you want to listen to it or send it to a friend, it'll be up by the end of today. Also, you can feel free to contact our office. The contact details are here with any other additional questions. But we really are glad to have you here. Thank you so much, Kim and Jon, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you soon.